Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ كَرِهُوا مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأَحْبَطَ أَعْمَالَهُم. That is so that they disliked something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, and so all of their deeds were made of no avail. All of their deeds then were in vain. And if someone is a Muslim, but then he dislikes something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed, then all of his good deeds will be of naught, because he has made a deed, he has performed a deed that takes him from Islam into kufr. And again, if we understand what Iman is all about, if we understand what it means to be a true Muslim, we will understand why this act is an act of kufr. Because one of the aspects of Iman, the true believer, especially the one who has the complete belief, but even actually it is an essential aspect of Iman. There's no question that it is an essential aspect of Iman to love what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves and to hate what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates. This is an essential aspect and essential characteristic of a believer, that he must love what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves and he hates what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates. And this flows from being a believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than you love anything else. If one person, for example, a man loves his wife, and he knows that his wife loves to see certain things around her, she likes to do certain things, then if he has a strong love for her, then he will do the best to make sure that those things that his wife likes, she will always have available to her, or always will be around her. Of course, assuming they're halal. Inshallah, they're halal. And those things that she dislikes, he will do his best to make sure that she doesn't have to come across them. This is if he has a real strong love for his wife. Well, the love, of course, that the believer should have towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should be greater than any kind of this love that we see in the dunya. We should love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than our fathers, our brothers, our wives, our children, and so forth. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states clearly in Surah At-Tawbah, قُلْ I don't remember the beginning of the verse. إن كنت آباؤكم وأبناؤكم وأخوانكم وأزواجكم وعشيراتكم وأموال اقترفتموها وتجارة تخشون كسادها ومساكن ترضونها أحب إليكم من الله ورسوله وجهاد في سبيله فتربصوا حتى يأتي الله بأمره. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions many categories in this verse, saying that if your fathers or your children or your tribe or your wives and so on, and the wealth that you have and so on, if any of these are more beloved to you than Allah and His Messenger, and striving in His way, not only Allah but also Allah and His Messenger, and jihad in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if any of these are more beloved to you than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and jihad and His Messenger and striving the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then wait for the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to come. And the Quranic expression, wait for the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to come, means what? حتى يأتي الله بأمره. When you read that in the Quran, this is an expression you'll find many times in the Quran. You should be familiar with what it means. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, wait for the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to come, what does He mean?
Judgment.
So it means explicitly in this phrase, in these phrases, it means wait for the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, if any of these things are more beloved to you than Allah and His Messenger and jihad in His way, then wait for the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to come to you. So in essence, the believer should love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than anything else, and that love also means that he loves for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declares that he loves something, and whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to do anything, this means he loves that thing. And whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibits anything from us, this means he dislikes that thing. So whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to do something or approves of something in the Sharia, this means that he loves that thing. And so therefore, we also should love that thing out of our love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is how great the love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should be, that we not only love Allah, but based on that love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we love everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does. This is why the believer, for example, one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the most is Iman, belief, faith, and the believers. So it is obligatory upon the Muslim to love the believers. And one of the things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates the most is kufr, and disbelief and shirk, and the people of kufr, the kuffar, the disbelievers. So therefore the believers should hate the disbelievers. All of that is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And secondly, also, even if you wanted to take this point a step further, we have to realize, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran about the Prophet ﷺ, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, that all of the Sharia and everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us to do or prohibited us from, all of it is a mercy to us. And actually it's even in our own benefit, both in this life and the hereafter to follow. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never wanted us to do anything just to, so to speak, give us a hard time. That's not the best way to say it, but I mean Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never orders us to do anything, and He just to do it, even if it's just to do something difficult for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders us to do is for our own benefit, both in this life and the hereafter. So therefore, how could it be for a believer, someone who claims to be a believer, someone who claims to have Iman, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should command him or her to do something and he will dislike that thing? Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should prohibit something and he should like the thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibits? This goes clearly against the essence of Iman, of faith, of belief in Islam. And we can take many examples, unfortunately, of this kind of phenomena of people not liking certain things. Alhamdulillah, all of the sisters who are attending here are wearing hijab, but you can, if you go to some communities that I've spoken to, you can find sisters who openly will say that they don't like the hijab. They will openly say that they do not like hijab. And of course, if they don't like it, then they usually refuse to wear it. She's claiming to be a believer, she's claiming to be Muslim, and unfortunately sometimes they claim, some of those same people who say that, they claim to be the best Muslims, as what happened one time when I visited a community in Illinois. The believer, whether it's a man or woman, if you want to take this case of the hijab, for example, the believer should look at the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not look at it as this is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us to do and we have to do it and so forth. And if there's a hardship and actually it's tough and I don't want to do it and it's hard. No, this is not how we should look towards the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, regardless of what command we're talking about.